Hey, it's Marcel. Let me get honest with you for a minute. We've reached a time in history when building up strong leaders truly matters if you want to grow your business. But managing through fear, command and control, and do as I say ways of managing is not going to get you there. So, what will? In my research, I found that the most effective leadership boils down to 6 key behaviors. They are behaviors that, when filtered down to every management level, can create high performance in your teams and build a great work culture. By the way, this is the new topic that I speak on at company events and conferences and virtual stages all over the world. It's great for keynotes, webinars, half-day or full-day workshops, and leadership retreats. So if you want to learn a clear and practical framework to help design the best work environment for your people to flourish, this is the way to go, and I can show you how to do it. To book me for your event, visit my website, marcelschwantes.com, and click on Speaking. Enjoy the show.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Hey, glad you are here. Thanks for choosing to spend time with us. We are grateful. And if you could share this episode with a friend on social media, we will be even more grateful. That small gesture will help us get to our goal of 1 million downloads. So back in 2018, a new term entered the business lexicon because of a best-selling book called The Fearless Organization, authored by Harvard Business School professor, Dr. Amy Edmondson. So in Amy's research, she discovered something really important about high-performing teams, right? If you read it, you know what I'm talking about, that when people are allowed to safely express ideas and ask questions and admit mistakes without the fear of being shut down or punished, well, good things happen. It's what leads to a high-performing culture. And Amy called it, what else? Psychological safety. And now it's a household term. Sometimes it's even used out of context, as a catch-all term for engagement, well-being, and lots of other people and culture stuff. So Amy has followed up that book with a new book. It's called Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. There's the cover if you're watching on YouTube. And it's a blurry picture because I got the blur on. But it was just released in September. So drawing on her decades of original research, Amy shares how we can surpass a superficial approach to failure. This is a book about failing. So let me quote her. Amy says, "It's not easy or obvious to know how to fail well, but with so many critical and complex issues facing us personally, in business, and in the world at large, we must learn to frame failure differently as a source of information, as part of our personal development, and as an experience shared by everyone." And believe me, it is shared by everyone because I can't think of one person who has not failed, whatever your role, title, status is. So I'm thrilled, and you've probably heard her already snickering in the background, that Amy Edmondson is here to share her findings about failing in her new book. So this is her second appearance on the show, by the way. She was here with the captivating Tomas Chamorro per Music back, over a year ago or so. If you want to check out that episode, it's episode 87. All right, so if you're new to Amy Edmondson, she is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School. She's renowned for her research, as I stated earlier, on psychological safety over 20 years. Her award-winning work has appeared all over the map, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and I could go on and on and on. She was named by Thinkers 50 in 2021 as the #1 management thinker in the world. And Doctor, Amy Edmondson now joins us. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amy, we have a new tradition, and I don't think I sprung this up on either you or Tomas last time. So this is how we start. You ready?
I'm ready.
What's your story?
How much time do you have? Honestly, let me think how best to answer that. I suppose, my story, if we start in the present moment, is I'm a professor. I'm a scholar of management, of organizational behavior. I'm at Harvard Business School, where I've been for the last quarter century. But that is certainly not where I started. Not even where I was intending to go. This is about as far afield of my original career aspirations as you can imagine. So I guess you could say I'm a failed engineer. I studied engineering in college. I started out as an engineer in a unique capacity. I was the so-called chief engineer for Buckminster Fuller. At that time, I was his only engineer, so I had no one to chief, just me, which was enough, really. And Buckminster Fuller, as some of our listeners may know, was a rather famous inventor and thinker and visionary, maybe best described as a futurist. And his kind of single-minded idea was, how do we use our minds and our capability for design and innovation to make the world better for all, right? It's a kind of idealistic and rather large, encompassing vision, if you will. And he didn't think there was one best way to do that. He thought we all had a kind of obligation to do that with our own skills and education to try to do that. So you can probably imagine that was a very inspiring place to work, and it was. Bucky, who was in his 80s at the time, was generous and warm and visionary and inspiring, and it was just, I have to say, he spoiled me for real work, right? When you have a job where my job was trigonometric calculations for the development of new geodesic formations. I loved it. I got to do engineering drawings. I got to build models. I got to interact with people in different parts of the world who were trying to apply these ideas. So it was a joy, right? It was. It's hard to imagine a kind of more inspiring way to have your first job, and it lasted for about 3 years, and until he died at his wife's deathbed, which was a shock right at the time. Wow. I mean, he was a week shy of 88, but still it was not something that we saw coming. And at that time, I had to decide what to do next. And people had, throughout that 3 years, other people in the organization had said I was good at explaining things. So they used to say, you should sort of write a book that makes Bucky's mathematical ideas more accessible to people. And I used to say, sure, thinking, not a writer, when am I going to do that? But after he died so suddenly, I had this idea that I either have to do that now or never. I mean, I understood that if I go find another job, I will be busy for the rest of my life. I will never do this. And I had this sense of obligation that it was something that I owed Bucky. I owed Bucky this opportunity to make some of his ideas more accessible. So I went home. I moved home, back in with my parents, and wrote this book. And fortunately, it was picked up by. You see if it's right here. Actually, just sort of for fun.
Yeah.
No, it's like academic, sort of an academic. Doesn't go with my sweater, but it's called A Fuller Explanation, and it's the synergetic geometry of our Buckminster Fuller. But that took me, a little over a year to write it. Another quarter of a year to do all the drawings. It has many drawings, and then to all the copy edits that happen and all that stuff. So I was. While I was doing that, in order to make a little bit of money, I taught either math or engineering as a sort of a substitute, both in a high school and then later in a college called Pratt Institute in New York. And somewhere in the back of my mind, and then I promise I'll wrap this up, I started to realize that this is what I was. I was a kind of a writer, a teacher. I was someone who could think and translate and make sure people got complicated things. But then I was like, but I didn't have a field. I knew I wasn't really going to be an engineer or an architect. And so I almost had to start from scratch. After the book came out, I had to start from scratch. But in the back of my mind, there was this little idea that almost didn't have a name, but that I was an academic, but I didn't have a field. And in my search then for a job, because of course I had to have a job, I met a wonderful visionary entrepreneur named Larry Wilson, who had started Wilson Learning Corporation in the 60s, and had done quite well. And he then retired, and he said he flunked retirement. He was in his 50s, so he started another company called Pecos River Learning Centers. And he met me, essentially on an airplane when I was giving a talk about Buckminster Fuller's work, and he said, "Come work for me." And long story short, I didn't really have a better idea, so I went to work for him. And the company he had just started was in the culture change business. It was all about going into companies and helping leaders lead and building teams. And in my shorthand, we were trying to build learning organizations, some of corporate America's largest players that ranged from General Motors to Apple to DuPont, to Kraft Foods. It was really fun. It was unexpectedly fun. And Larry asked me to be his sort of head of research. And so I got to read a lot of the research in this field and meet a lot of the researchers and spend a lot of time in companies. And at some point I thought, this is great stuff, but I have no training, right? No formal training. I have no psychology. I have no business. So I thought I better go back to school. And so 10 years after graduating from college, I went, and I didn't realize at the time that people don't do a PhD that often 10 years later. You do it when you're younger. But so it was a bit of a shock at first to get to back to a university setting and be taking statistics and basics of psychological and management research. And my head was spinning, and I thought for at least the first 2 years I'm going to have to drop out, but because I felt I was so in over my head. But I slowly but surely got the hang of it. I started to understand what academic writing is like, and what the papers need to be like, and what the research looks like. And by my third year, I was really beginning to realize this is who I am. This is where I belong, which was quite a joyful thing. And that is love in action, right? When you find work that you feel is almost meant for you, and you can do it in a way that people seem to appreciate what I was doing, and it, the ideation and the writing. Like I'd learned with the Bucky book how to write. I hadn't really written in college. I'd done problem sets, but I learned how to write clearly. And when it wasn't right, I would just, cross it out and try again. And so there was this dawning recognition that I am a writer, I'm a scholar, I'm a teacher, and they pay me to do this, right? They pay you to go to a PhD program, and then they pay you. Ultimately, I was able to get a faculty job when I graduated, and I've been here ever since.
Such a great story. I'm so glad you shared. There's not one second of that I'm going to edit out, because so many people we're so used to hearing about you and reading about you, and we think, oh yeah, Amy Edmondson has always been a scholar and a researcher, and she's worked at Harvard Business School forever. She was probably born there. And so to hear that you were actually at one time an engineer and one that actually failed at her trade. So yeah, it's good to know that.
It was a circuitous journey. It really was. Mm-hmm. I mean, even describing it like that, there were many false starts. I remember this was pre-internet, obviously, but I remember applying for a job that it sounded like they were looking for smart, hardworking people. I thought I could be that, and I got rejected and it just feels bad, of course, but it's like finding the fit, right? Finding the fit between what you're good at and what the world needs is not an easy journey, but once you find it, if you find it, you're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess that's a good segue to the book, actually, since we're talking about failing. So let's start from the top, right kind of wrong, and then we'll just kind of drill down. So what's the big idea behind the book? Give us the 30,000 foot level.
Sure. I think the big idea, wait for it, is that not all failure is alike. When we hear failure, we think bad. We think we don't want that, we want success. And it is true that some failures are bad and that they can, and I think should be prevented as often as possible. But some failures are genuinely good because they bring us new information that we truly couldn't have gotten any other way. And I call those intelligent failures. And they are intelligent because they occur in new territory where we don't yet have existing knowledge, in pursuit of some goal. And you have good reason to believe that what you're trying might work. That is, you have a hypothesis that's informed by available knowledge, even if we don't have the full knowledge. And then finally, the failure is good when it's no bigger than it has to be to get the new knowledge, right? So so the big idea is there are different kinds of failure. There is a good kind, but please understand there are also bad kinds, and we have lots of opportunities to prevent those when we're at our best.
Yeah, and in the business world, so because our podcast is geared towards people in high places. Lots of leaders listening. Nobody wants to fail, Amy. It's embarrassing, right? I mean, there's shame attached to it. So we inherently, I think, learn to avoid it. And I think for the sake of this conversation, it's important to understand that if we accepted failure as part of life, as part of learning, maybe we'd be a lot more open to it and not see it as a major catastrophe, right? But we don't.
Right. I mean, first of all, there's two different strands to that idea. One is we have to accept, as the old saying goes, that to err is human, right? That we will make mistakes. That's not the same thing as embracing, intelligent failures, right? Mistakes are deviations from best practice in known territory. Whereas an intelligent failure is essentially an experiment that didn't work out the way we had hoped. Yeah. And so it is natural and understandable when people in high places, as you say, when people in companies shy away from embracing failure. They just don't want failure. They want only success. The easiest way to achieve that is to not take risks. But that creates obviously another risk, right? That creates the risk of stagnation or of obsolescence, right? If your company isn't innovating, and in order to innovate, you've got to experiment. In order to experiment, you've got to sometimes fail. Then you will no longer be relevant at some point in the future. We can't tell you an exact date, but we can tell you that it is a given that more companies, die a premature death than continue on in perpetuity. So there's no way to live life or run a company that's risk-free or failure-free. They go hand in hand. So it's really about, are you willing to embrace the intelligent failures so as to, innovate and improve and thrive in an uncertain world? Or are you going to just say, no, not on my watch? In which case, at some future date, you're out of luck.
Yeah. Can we get into this, maybe the mindset of why we're so afraid of failing? Maybe I answer the question with the question, I don't know, it's fear, but are there other reasons why we are so afraid of failing?
I mean, I think it's a combination of what I'll call hardwiring and socialization. I mean, our hardwiring, which is a kind of an evolutionary vestige of prehistoric times, where, in fact, if you failed or experienced a failure that could be indeed fatal, if you were sort of rejected by the tribe, that would very likely lead to death from starvation or exposure or both. And so there's a kind of, there's a strong reason why we care what others think of us. We don't want rejection. We want acceptance. And we have then been socialized to believe that acceptance comes from succeeding, not failing, like from getting the answer right in school, not wrong, from playing it safe, not going for gold. Right. And there's a lot of messaging in our culture, which I believe is being exacerbated by social media in a way that is deeply pernicious for people.
No question. Yeah, social media has so much to do with just putting the pressure on you to actually perform and be perfectionistic. And you look at people that have such unbelievably high measures of success that most of us will never attain.
Right.
That we put that pressure on ourselves, and then we eventually fail.
Right, we eventually fail. And also, we're not putting, when we're on social media, we're not seeing sort of real life unfold. Yeah. We're seeing curated bits of life. We're seeing people putting their best foot forward, putting their, best looking photograph or their, lovely vacation memories. We're not seeing kind of the downs. We're seeing the ups.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. Everybody is exposed to failing, and if you're human, you've probably failed at one time or another. Okay, let's be real. So, two-part question for the smart, savvy business leader at the top of the mountain who has to answer to boards and shareholders and Wall Street and the media. Okay, yeah. What shift needs to happen in their minds for that person? In other words, how can they rethink failure? And then bring it down to the everyday, person that is like, oh, I'm just trying to make a day-to-day here and pay my bills and feed my family.
Well, let's start with that, right? Let's start with the everyday person. If you already have a family, this part won't apply. But if you have a family, that means you have gone through some intelligent failures most of the time. Very few of us meet our sweetheart in 8th grade and then, stay together for the rest of our lives, right? So most of us had some dating experience and, maybe some relationships that didn't work out, right? So that means we have experienced intelligent failures in our personal life, and in our quest to find a life partner, we have necessarily had some false starts, right? So, and I would say not always, but many of those were intelligent failures, right? You had good reason to believe this could be, a great person to spend your life with, or you wouldn't have started the relationship or gone into the relationship. It was new territory. There's no crystal ball. There's no way to know for sure in advance that this is going to work out as you hope. There's a goal, of course, to connect and maybe build a life together, maybe build a family together. And it's no bigger, hopefully, no bigger than it has to be to understand whether this is working or not. Of course, sometimes that constitutes an intelligent failure, and that covers an awful lot of life. Like I described, trying to find a career for me involved lots of failures along the way.
Right.
None of them fatal. None of them, creating undue harm for others. Right. So I think what this is, what this means, whether you're running a company or trying to, live a good life, is that we need to embrace the possibility of failure in new territory because it's always there. And we're better off kind of realizing that in advance than being blindsided by it and, feeling like, oh, that's not supposed to be there. It's not supposed to work that way. It's so forewarned is forearmed. Maybe that's not a great phrase, but it's the idea is when we are clear-eyed about reality, both the reality of life and the reality of our companies and our markets, we're better equipped to navigate that reality skillfully, right? So that's kind of that's what it's all about. So all failure is not alike. Let's do our very best to apply the knowledge we have to prevent preventable failures. And then let's do our very best to make sure we've got enough of our resources, human and otherwise, dedicated to the discovery of tomorrow's value propositions, dedicated to innovation.
I like that. I'm curious because I dropped this word a couple of minutes ago about perfectionism. What role does our tendency to be perfect and not fail maybe play in this failure mindset?
Oh, it's a central role. And actually just around the same time as my book came out, another book came out by Thomas Curran, who's a perfectionism scholar, right? He's a great scholar, but what he studies is perfectionism. He's a psychologist who studies perfectionism in the UK, and it's a beautiful book. And it's really about, of course, the harm that the mindset of perfectionism does to people, especially at the extreme, right? And a lot of times people, maybe in a job interview will say, yeah, I'm a perfectionist as a strength. It's actually a misnomer. It's good to have high standards. It's good to pursue excellence, but perfectionism is a kind of crippling belief that I cannot make a mistake. I cannot come up short, or I'll die. I mean, I will, or I'll be rejected, or I won't be who I think. I mean, there's such a deep anxiety about falling short that it can be profoundly limiting in your ability to do good work, right? And to make good friendships and relationships, because you're so terrified of being found out for who you really are, which is not perfect, because none of us are perfect, right? We're fallible human beings, each and every one of us. So perfectionism is a mindset that is quite at odds with the mindset of health, but a mindset of a healthy failure mindset, where that you have an opportunity and even a responsibility to do your best in known territory, but you also will, like it or not, find yourself frequently in new territory, and you just will have to be thoughtful in your experiments.
So is the very act of failing the antidote to being a perfectionist? In other words, if you fail, will you be less of a perfectionist?
I think so. I mean, it depends. I mean, if you fail and you overreact, and you go into a tailspin where you're, afraid to come back out of the shell because it was such a horrible experience, then that obviously won't be helpful. But more often than not, a little bit of failure does help the perfectionist, right? That because you sort of like, oh, I failed and I'm still here. I'm okay. Right? I mean, If you can mount the healthy attributions about the failure, then you are well on your way to developing failure muscles, right? And failure muscles, just like running muscles or math muscles. I know those aren't literally true, but these are a way of strengthening our ability to bounce back from disappointments.
Yeah, the shock is less the more you experience it.
Right.
And I think for the perfectionist is the more failure you experience.
Right.
It brings you kind of down to earth. It lowers your expectations. Yeah. Maybe your, I don't know.
Or makes them more realistic.
Yeah,
right?
There you go. Yeah.
So it's not as if, once you realize, it's okay, right? And you talk yourself through it, you absolutely are better off. Because imagine, the real problem with perfectionism is that it will prevent you from taking risks, right? Because you're smart enough to know that certain things don't come with a guarantee. So you'll do what my former wonderful mentor Larry Wilson called play not to lose. And when you play not to lose, you can look like you're winning, right? You can because you're getting, you're taking the easy courses, you're getting an A, you're dating the people who or are going to like you or what have you. And you're not taking the stretch goals in any aspect of your life. So, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but there is this potential for, mediocrity that which would, you define that however that means for you, but you're not willing to go for what you really would love to do or try because the risk of failing is too terrifying.
Oh, that's such an interesting take. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm so curious because the research on the right kind of work, right kind of wrong, excuse me, as it stated in the back of the book or in the copy that I got, spans decades. Well, your research on psychological safety spans decades. I'm wondering if there was a merger of the two at some point. Is there a link?
No. They were never separate, really, honestly. So let's go. Let me just say, I discovered psychological safety by accident because I was part of a larger team studying medical errors. Now, and actually more specifically, medical errors that produced adverse drug events, right? So not just, I mean, we all make mistakes, right? But the kind of, if a mistake or mistakes aren't caught, that can lead to real harm, to patients. And in the early 90s, this was a kind of new, a dawning realization in the healthcare community that people were in hospitals were sometimes getting harmed from the care, not from their disease. And so there was real interest in digging into this. I joined the team because I was interested in this phenomenon of being a learning organization. And I figured, well, mistakes, learning, they go together. And so that's why I was a part of it. I didn't have a particular interest in medicine or healthcare, but I was interested in what does it take to be a learning organization? After all, we're in a changing world. Organizations need to learn. And that was as good a handhold on a research opportunity as I knew about at the time. So adverse drug events are inherently failures, right? These are not desired outcomes. They're usually complex failures. They're multi-causal, sort of lots of little things that add up and didn't get caught and corrected, in part because people don't speak up. So you can see where I'm going. This was by getting deeply into that context, I discovered the phenomenon of people feeling profoundly inadequate in speaking up when they weren't sure about how to do something or when they saw a mistake. And just that's normal, right? Human beings don't like to say, hey, I just made a mistake, or hey, I think you're making a mistake. But the surprise was that different teams, in the same organization had really different norms and behaviors and expectations around that fundamental behavior, right? So that in some places, people were very candid and very quick to speak up. And in other places, they were very afraid. And I later called those differences in psychological safety. And, I published some papers on this and so on. And, I never thought it would become, as you said at the outset, a household word, but that was in part because other players, notably Google, started using that research and discovered that it was psychological safety was a very predictive factor in team performance, right? And so then all of a sudden, I wrote the book about it, and I became known as the sort of psychological safety person. But psychological safety has always been just a piece of a larger puzzle of how do we help organizations learn as they must in a changing world? And another piece of that puzzle is how do we help them pursue more intelligent failures so that they can innovate as needed in a changing world. So these have been integrated from the very beginning. But of course, when you write a paper or when you write a book, it has to be focused on something and do a good job clarifying that something, as if that something is a standalone, but it's never a standalone, really.
Yeah. Wow. So Silicon Valley is they're known for fail fast, fail often, break things. Is all failure good, or is there bad failure that we need to absolutely avoid?
There's absolutely bad failure that we need to avoid. So let's just think about those phrases for a moment. Fail fast, break things. I will argue that's perfectly good advice. In fact, very good advice as an entrepreneur in new territory. Now, I don't really love break things, right? I mean, I think that's, unless it's like break assumptions, break old
habits,
obsolete ideas and habits.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
But I don't really think you should break your glasses, or I should break this, cup over here, or anything like that. So I'm a big believer in preserving things that are valuable. So this perfectly good advice in what I will call new territory, right? You've got to fail fast because you have to discover fast what works, and just as importantly, what doesn't. And by doing that, you get to your goal faster, your goal of a new company or a new product or a new invention. And so that makes good sense. But go tell a pilot at Delta Airlines to fail fast, fail often. That pilot would look right back at you and say, "What are you talking about?" Right?
What are you smoking? Yeah.
That's completely nonsensical. And they would be right to push back. So my problem with the fail fast rhetoric is simply that it's context dependent, and it acts as if it isn't, right? It fails to make the crucial distinctions between those domains where that is very good advice and those domains where that would be very bad advice. And that's, the essence of the book is let's be a bit more precise here. Let's tailor our best practices to the context in an appropriate way.
Yeah. So in other words, if you need to be a learning organization, it's totally okay to fail
in parts of it, right? In R&D or as a startup, right? Startups know that they're going to fail while they're discovering their formula for success. But once they discover a formula for success and they've got customers relying on them to deliver that value, then they should be a lot more focused on delivering that value, although they better have a few people over here off to the side doing the R&D for tomorrow's value.
Yeah. All right. Let's transition to solutions. I'm really curious about the practice or the science of failing well. How do we create a failing well mindset? I mean, is there a first step?
Yeah, if I'm going to say something, I'm going to answer that question with knowledge that some of our listeners may recognize, because it's virtually identical to the answer to the question of how do you create psychological safety. And so it's how do you create a good failure mindset? How do you create a healthy failure culture? That's again one and the same as psychological safety. So it's part one is set the stage. Right? Get out. If you're a leader in an organization, get out ahead of some of these predictable failures in mindset and behavior that your employees and your managers will fall prey to, and the problematic behaviors you want to get out ahead of so that they don't happen are, to insist on perfection, to say, you better meet that goal or else, because that really sends a strong message that I don't want to hear from you, when reality intervenes. And that's honestly the last thing you want. So, articulate the nature of the work and the context in which you're doing it as follows. Be very focused on how much uncertainty is there, how much novelty is there, like what is it we're trying to do and why. I do think emphasizing purpose early and often is very powerful because it helps people take the necessary risks that learning entails. Like when I remind myself, we're here to take care of patients, or we're here to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. It helps me overcome the little interpersonal challenges that I face, right? So that's so basically just reframe reality as best you can as a reality that involves uncertainty or novelty or both, so that people know, yes, this is the kind of reality where of course we speak up, where of course we experiment, where of course we offer a dissenting view, full stop, right? But then that's not enough. Right, that's kind of saying, don't forget, we're in this crazy world trying to do something really important, but then proactively invite input, right? Ask good questions. come out on a routine basis saying things like, I may miss something. What are you seeing out there? Oh, what are customers saying? What ideas do you have? I mean, you're showing your curiosity in a way that invites people to offer their tentative suggestions and concerns. And then finally, monitor your response, particularly to bad news. Your instinct when someone brings you bad news, a project has not delivered as follows, will be to feel angry, feel upset, feel frustrated, and often to say things like, well, how did that happen, as your very first response. It's an important question. I think we always want to look into what happened and why, but your first response ought to be what I'll call forward facing, where it's sort of thanks for that clear line of sight. How can I help? Right. Mm-hmm. The more you react in a learning oriented way to bad news, the more people are well set up to fix the problems that will inevitably occur.
Yes, which will prevent them from failing in a bad or horrific way later. Okay.
Right. I mean, so many big failures that I've studied could have been prevented had people been more willing and able to speak up when they were just small failures or small problems.
I'm smiling because it's the more you talk, the more I'm listening to Fearless Organization in my head.
Oh yes, no, it's true.
Yeah.
As I said, they're all integrated.
Intertwined.
But this is substance. This is more about the substance of work in Fearless Organization. I talk about the different contexts. The more routine and the more variable and the more innovative contexts. You'll see that again in this book, but it's more now, okay, what really is the playbook for success in those contexts?
Yeah.
With a healthy mindset around what could go wrong.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of, humble leadership, read Edgar Schein's book. And so what role does humility play in feeling well? Humility plays a huge role in failing well, because humility, which is not the same, and I love Ed Schein and his books, humility is not the same as false modesty, right? It's not, I don't know anything, I don't have a PhD, what have you. It's the humility to know that you don't have a crystal ball, right? It's the humility to know that even your glances backwards are limited by your expertise, your biases, your understanding of what has already happened is imperfect, but your glances forward are absolutely imperfect, right? So it's the humility to say, wow, I wonder what could happen next. And I really want it to be, serving our purpose and on target. So I'm going to have to rely on others, and I'm going to have to show up in a way that people appreciate that I'm interested and willing to learn. Yeah. I always thought that curiosity was always a great strength of the humble leader myself.
Yeah. So, but they go hand in hand, right? As soon as you remind yourself to be humble, you are almost naturally curious. Like, oh, I'm missing, you're basically saying when you're humble, you're saying, oh, I'm missing something. I'm not omniscient, right? And then it's like, well, what is it? I'm desperate to know. So I'm curious.
Yeah. All right. You got a lot of stories or illustrations, case studies of leaders, executives in the book learning to have failed well. Is there one that you like that kind of floats to the top? What's a good example of a business leader?
There, as you say, there's so many, but perhaps my favorite story is because it's almost intelligent, but not quite. Is Ray Dalio's failure in 1982, well publicized at the time, where he was a very successful entrepreneur and had started the financial services, the investment firm Bridgewater, which still exists today. But in 1982, he had essentially bet all of the firm's resources on a prediction that he had about the direction the U.S. economy was heading that was absolutely counter to what virtually everyone else thought would happen. Dalio was convinced that he was right and everyone else is wrong. And he suddenly found himself literally in 1982 unable to pay his family's bills. Right? He had to borrow money from his dad. And this is a guy with, an MBA from Harvard, 7 years of such success that he was constantly on business news programs. And, he was a real success story, right? And then suddenly here he is with this massive failure. Now, that doesn't sound like, a good outcome, and it wasn't, except that it was life-changing for him. So this is why I name it as a favorite story, because in that, in being shocked to be wrong, and also, in sort of in trouble, having been wrong, Dalio later said that failure was the best thing that ever happened to me. And what you are about to hear coming is that, yes, he did learn from it. And he learned from it. He learned the right lessons from it. He said, I learned to sort of temper my confidence with humility and to shift from the mindset of, I know I'm right. But, he was so smart and so, so knowledgeable, to, I wonder why I'm right. Just hear how that just opens up the crack of curiosity, right, that was missing before. And that new mindset was one of what I call choosing learning over knowing. That's an active choice. And that's an active choice that all of us can learn to make, but we don't make it spontaneously. We spontaneously, just because of how we're wired, we choose knowing over learning. But if you can shift to choosing learning over knowing, remarkable things can happen. And the next 40 years since that time, Bridgewater has been one of the most successful firms in its industry, by a margin, a good margin. So let's go back to that failure, though. It was obviously new territory, right? Nobody can see the future of the economy. It was in pursuit of a goal, right, to make money. He had done his homework, right? He had a hypothesis. Nobody was a better student of the markets and economic indicators than Ray Dalio. So far, those are the first 3 criteria for an intelligent failure. But he missed the last one, right? The last one, remember, is no bigger than it has to be, right? The failure should be as small as possible to get the new knowledge. You don't bet everything you have in uncertain terrain. And so it wasn't intelligent. It was almost intelligent, but not intelligent. And yet he learned the right lessons from it. And that contributed to his, you could argue that his subsequent success would have been less without that big, hit over the head kind of moment.
Yeah. Amy, when you fail as an organization, would you go as far as those people that say that, oh yeah, we need to celebrate failure, we need to throw a party?
Yes, I am a big fan of intelligent failures having parties or rituals of some kind where we we get together and we toast the hard work that went into this discovery, this necessary work that went into this discovery. I would never suggest celebrating a basic failure or a complex failure. We would never celebrate a failure that involved fatalities. We would never celebrate a failure that involves someone doing sloppy work on purpose, right? So, but if we, new territory in pursuit of a goal with a hypothesis and no bigger than it had to be, I think yes, because it's the only way to make sure people are willing to keep doing it going forward. And that's the only way to make sure that we succeed going forward.
Yeah, it's celebrating failure to advance the greater good.
Right.
Of the organization. Right. Yeah. Okay. Wow. So let's see. Let's pull back and think about this more systemically, or maybe the cultural, when it comes to the work culture. What would you tell, the senior executives who kind of set the criteria, the policies, the procedures, et cetera, to create a fail well culture or a system that promotes that? What would you tell them?
First, don't assume, right? Don't assume that people are thinking coherently and logically at all times about the obvious need that you see, for innovation, for continued progress, for speaking up clearly and honestly with what they see, what they know, what they worry about. Just don't assume that's the case. Assume, in fact, it's not the case unless you and your colleagues do the hard work to build that kind of culture. To me, psychological safety is about speaking up, yes, but almost a more accurate way to describe this is it's a learning culture. Do you want a learning culture in your organization, or do you want a knowing culture? And I think you want a learning culture that is dedicated to high standards because the purpose is meaningful to you and to your employees. So it's about don't assume, get out ahead of it, frame the opportunity that you see, that you glimpse, as the very real opportunity it is, but recognize that it involves risk-taking along the way. Invite that, clarify that, be open to it, celebrate it. Probably as a senior leader, you do three key things that affect the culture. One is how you show up, your behavior. You are a role model, like it or not, right? So you show up as a learner, as someone who acknowledges their own mistakes, their own, I got that wrong, right? You will just set that model that's actually a strong and important way to be around here. You also are responsible for putting in place, the systems and practices and training and opportunities to develop others, and you're responsible to give clear and helpful feedback to the people that report directly to you, and those are the primary ways that you sort of shape the culture, and they're far more powerful than many people realize.
Yeah. And it's, again, it's like, it's becoming so much more evident to me, the link between psychological safety and sort of setting the conditions to fail well is becoming even more clear.
Yeah. Great. Right. Because that's what it's all about. I could have easily written these two books in the other order, although I wouldn't have and couldn't have, but I mean, logically it'd be fine, right? Just let's talk about what it means to fail well. And then, okay, since we've done that, now let's really drill down into what does it take to create the kind of psychologically safe failure culture that makes this sing. But here, this is the substance, this is the substance of what work looks like, or what life looks like in uncertain domains versus the more certain ones.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, Amy, what's your ultimate hope for people reading this book?
My hope is that they get, something of a playbook for navigating our inherently uncertain world, that they can use at home as parents, that they can use, as young people starting out their career, and also as senior leaders, leading organizations. That there is, they have a responsibility and an opportunity to make distinctions between domains, and where failure is just absolutely essential to progress, and where at our best we can prevent most failures. Just that kind of playbook. I mean, I think it's hard for me to imagine living my life without it at this point, because it's become so part of my thinking. So I think that's really the aspiration right there.
Yeah. So we have this tradition on the show. It's posing the leadership love question, and I'm like, I think we can actually make a link to failing well, to attaching practical care and love to this. So here's the question is basically, how do we lead our businesses, our employees, with more practical and actionable love day in and day out? And is there a link to maybe the topic of today's discussion?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, my one, if I had one word answer, it would be empathy, right? That just pause and remind yourself that you don't know, but you can imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, right? And what they might be going through. And when you're leading with empathy, you're going to be better able to care for people. I like your title though of Love in Action. I mean, I think work is love in action. Love is essentially a bond, right? Love is like gravity. It's a force that pulls things together, and love is metaphysical gravity. So Buckminster Fuller said, and so love is about feelings of connection, not distance from each other, and love in action is about caring and showing up in a way that recognizes our interdependence. It's our interdependence is undeniable, but we try to deny it. We try to sort of just be an island. And I think the final chapter of the book and my final idea is that we are all fallible human beings. That's just a given. Now, how do we thrive, right? How do we thrive given that we're fallible human beings? And one answer is we must do it together, right? We must do it with love, with interconnectedness, and facing an unknown future together.
I'm so glad it came from you. That's great stuff. Amy, we bring it home with 2 questions as we do with every guest. Personally, what's really tugging at your heart right now that you'd like us to know?
Well, I'll put it like this: it's anger. I mean, I'm not angry. It's not that. It's just I see so much anger, and anger. Anger could be anger in a sense. Even more than hate is the opposite of love, right? Because it's almost there's a righteousness to anger. Anger says I'm right and you're wrong, and you're wrong for being wrong, and it's self-sealing, right? When I'm angry, I am not really open to the possibility that I may be missing something, that I should be more humble in my conclusion. So the human emotion, anger, it's clearly with us for a self-protective, it exists for self-protection in some evolutionary way, but it's a remarkably difficult and dangerous emotion that seems to be dominating many news stories today.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, you close us out, Amy. What's one key takeaway that we can take home with us?
Well, aim high, team up, fail well, learn fast.
I love it. That's going to be in my show notes. It's probably the quote, Amy's quote of the day. That's fantastic. It's been such an honor to get you back on the show, and just know that you always have a home here. Every time you bust out with a new book, we're going to bring you back.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So if people want to connect with you, where can they go?
Well, amycedmondson.com, and also go to Harvard Business School and to my faculty page if you want to get more detail about articles and other books. But Right Kind of Wrong is the place to go right now for most of the depth of these ideas. Yeah. Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. She is Amy Edmondson, and I'm Marcel Schwantes. Keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast. And also look for my show notes, as well as a YouTube link to watch the show on my website, marcelschwantes.com. And hey, finally, if you're interested in sponsoring an episode of the show, let's talk. Reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.